Terrific. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the start of a new year of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence, as usual, I'd ask you to check your phones and make sure they're switched off or turned to silent. Thanks very much. My name is Wes Galt and I chair this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. On my left is Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, Councillor Shima Ibuki, Councillor Sophie Tornay, our Mayor, Michael Nolan, Felicity Sinfield, and on the other side, geographically speaking, Councillor Victor Franco, Councillor Mal Osborne-Smith, Councillor Rob Ballieu, Councillor John Friend Pereira, and Councillor Chris Pattis. Welcome all. I acknowledge our Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr. Wee, on my left, and Director of Urban Living, Mr. Scott Walker, on my right. There are other officers in attendance tonight, and we'll introduce them as they need to present. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel to enable public viewing of the proceedings. It is also being recorded and will be made available again on the YouTube channel as soon as practicable after this meeting. The primary purpose, as we probably all know, of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those presenting this evening, when it comes to your item on the agenda, it will be introduced by an officer. Then I will call you to come forward one by one to join us at the horseshoe table. If you're making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said, and keep the submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you are opposed to a planning application, please tell the committee why you disagree and maybe suggest alternative approaches that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on those concerns rather than matters of history or details of the officer's presentation. There is a strict 3-minute limit for all speakers, including councillors. We can vary that time, but seldom do. When it gets to the 2.5-minute mark, as many of you will know, I'll ring a bell, indicating you have 30 seconds left. For those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take this opportunity for you to extend due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee as a whole, and refrain from inappropriate behaviour. This includes remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disturbing the decision-making process. You may only address Council with the consent of the Chair and must take direction from that chairperson whenever called to do so. Where members of the community disrupt or fail to comply with these instructions, the chairperson may have them removed from the meeting. And just to finish, I would like to encourage you all to speak clearly into the microphone so that we can all hear the discussion going on. So I'll now move to the body of the meeting. Number 1, apologies. Mr. Wee, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Chair, no apologies this evening.
Thank you very much. Item 2 is declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Councillor or council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that you want to foreshadow at this point in time? There are none. Thank you very much. So we now move to the proper body of the meeting. Presentation of officers' reports. Item 3.1, Community Heritage Nomination, Group 2, Outcome of Preliminary Consultation. Tonight, Emile Dixon will be presenting, our Senior Strategic Heritage Planner will be presenting the officer's report. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, in mid-2023, Council adopted the Community Heritage Nomination Process, or CHNP. The CHNP provides an efficient, consistent and transparent approach for Council's acceptance, consideration and processing of nominations made by community for buildings of potential heritage significance. In August 2024, Group 1 of the CHNP Council resolved to progress to a planning scheme amendment to include 8 properties nominated by the community in the heritage overlay of the Burundara planning scheme. That amendment is currently awaiting ministerial authorisation. Since then, Council has received nominations for a further 24 properties. Of those 24 properties, 2 were assessed by Council's heritage consultant as warranting protection in the heritage overlay. And these are 46 Fortuna Avenue, Baldwin North, and 4 Windsor Crescent, Surrey Hills. Both of these properties form Group 2 of the CHNP. Preliminary consultation with directly affected owners and occupiers and other interested parties was carried out from the 29th of October to the 6th of December last year, 2024. Council received feedback from 17 parties, of which 14 were supportive and 3 were opposed. Council officers and Council's heritage consultant reviewed all feedback received. The concerns raised were general in nature and applied broadly to the preservation of heritage. No technical or specific concerns were raised in the feedback. All issues raised have been addressed in Attachment 1 to the UPDC report tonight, and no changes have been recommended by Council officers to either of the citations in response to the preliminary feedback. Both properties are recommended to be included in the heritage overlay. Further to this, Council officers would also like to note that since the preparation of tonight's report, further feedback has been received from 2 additional parties, which are both supportive of heritage protection for the properties. The feedback has been circulated to councillors. Officers recommend the committee adopts the heritage citations for both nominated properties and further recommend that the UPDC resolve to write to the Minister for Planning, requesting authorisation to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to include the properties in the heritage overlay as individually significant on a permanent basis. And we're now happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
We might go through public submissions first. Tonight, 3 in our audience have indicated they wish to speak on these matters. None were against and 3 were in support of the officer's recommendation. So once I've announced your name, please come forward and sit at the head of the table. If a submitter is not present, I'll move to the next person. I remind you at this point in time there's a strict limit of 3 minutes, and I'd ask you to start your presentation with your name and the suburb in which you live. First we have Susan Barnett. If you could join us at the table, that'd be great.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on the subject of 4 Windsor Crescent, Surrey Hills. I'm Susan Barnett. I represent the Surrey Hills Historical Society, formerly living in Surrey Hills, but now in Mont Albert.
Thank you very much.
I commend the officers for the detail of their report. I haven't read such a thorough report for a long time. Whilst some of the objectors to the nomination of 4 Windsor Crescent have pointed out that Burundara has many Edwardian buildings, there are not many Edwardian buildings of brick in Surrey Hills, and this particular one is significant because of the tweaking of the style, if you like, to an Anglo-Indian bungalow, which links it to its builder, Dr. Neville Navroji Gandevia, who was one of few Indian doctors, I would say, in Burundara in the early 20th century, and one of Surrey Hills' earliest doctors. He had a bit of a tragic life, and I think it's not just his occupancy of the residence, but subsequent doctors, showing the style that was adopted in the early 20th century before mega medical clinics of having a combined home and surgery. I commend the officers for this report and would like to also note the Surrey Hills Historical Society's support of the community nomination process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Councillors, are there any questions of this submitter tonight? There are, it's very small. Councillor Boogie.
Oh, thank you very much, Susan, and nice to see you here tonight. You mentioned that it was an Edwardian property. I thought it was a Federation property.
A federation is really, if you like, a subcategory of Edwardian. Queen Anne is another subcategory, so broadly Edwardian, but the ones that were built particularly around the time of Federation had tweaks that reflected Australian nationalism. This one, in a way, is a little bit different again because of the Anglo-Indian influence.
Oh, thank you very much.
There are no further questions, so again, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I now call upon Yvonne Bauer to join us at the table.
My name is Yvonne Bowyer. I live in Surrey Hills and I'm speaking on behalf of the Surrey Hills and Mont Albert Progress Association.
Could you just mention where you live?
Yeah, sorry, I did. I live in Surrey Hills.
Sorry.
Yep. In December 2024, we lodged a brief submission to Council supporting officers' recommendation to include 4 Windsor Crescent, Surrey Hills in the schedule to the heritage overlay of the Boroondara planning scheme as a significant heritage place. We once again support this nomination and thank the Council officers for preparing the extensive reports and providing these to the community. We also support the Community Heritage nomination process, which acknowledges that some properties worthy of protection may have been missed or critical information may not have been available at the time of the municipal-wide Heritage Gap study. Whilst we appreciate the Community Heritage nomination process has some detractors, we note the extremely high threshold that must be met for a property to be included for recommendation. Furthermore, at the Boroondara Council meeting held on 19th of August 2024, the motion was carried to review the Community Heritage nomination process to improve the process. We look forward to the officers' report being made publicly available. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you very much for that. Councillors, are there any questions of this presenter tonight? There don't appear to be any, so thank you again.
Thank you.
And finally, I call upon Christina Brannigan to join us at the horseshoe table.
Good evening, councillors and officers. My name's Christina Brannigan. I live in Camberwell. I'm talking tonight on behalf of the Boroondara Heritage Group. So thank you very much, officers, for all your work to support us having a community nomination program, and councillors, which we think is very, very important and really ensures that the community still has a voice and the best of what remains is conserved for future generations. We strongly support both these properties being put forward to a planning scheme amendment process and a planning panel, which will ensure a fair and robust assessment and consideration process for them. Both houses have strong merit, as evidenced by the independent heritage experts, and they seem to meet the tough HERCON criteria used in Victoria. The Boyd House of Fortuna Avenue, designed by Robin Boyd, who at his death in 1971 is described in the Australian Dictionary of Biography as the most famous Australian architect of the time. When he died, Boyd was Australia's best-known architect, esteemed for both his writings and his buildings, and his greatest contribution, it goes on to say, was as a critic of and an advocate for the profession, a social commentator, publicist, polemicist, and an arbiter of taste and standards who challenged Australian complacency and apathy about his architecture. His work and influence has had the most profound impact on Australian architecture, and we're very lucky to have a number of his best modernist works here in Boroondara. He was also a local resident for several years. And as many of us know, mid-century and modernist homes are growing in their appreciation across Australia. But sadly, many of the mid-century homes in Balwyn that it was very well known for have since disappeared in recent years, along with many of their gardens and trees. Most have been replaced by single houses and are not delivering more housing, but rather a heated island effect. So conserving the best of these era of homes He's also going to help prevent even greater loss of private gardens and trees in Balwyn. Similarly, the House Luxmy at Windsor Crescent in Surrey Hills meets the HERCON criteria and should, we believe, be further considered. The other speakers have spoken eloquently about the reasons for that, so I won't repeat that, but it meets criterion A and criterion E and found to have aesthetic significance and historical significance. And so we support the recommendation to protect both houses.
Thank you very much. Again, councillors, are there any questions of this presenter tonight? There are none. Thank you again for your presentation. I will now return to officers for matters arising.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge and thank the supportive speakers who've come up and addressed the UPDC tonight, but we don't have any matters arising from that. We're happy to take any questions from councillors. Thank you.
Segue to your questions of officers. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, officers, for the comprehensive work and all the work that's gone into this, and thanks to the presenters for coming along tonight. I've noted for both the nominations, Fortuna Avenue in North Balwyn and Windsor Crescent in Surrey Hills, that they meet, out of all the criteria, they both meet historical significance and aesthetic significance. In working out whether they are nominated, can you just clarify for me and educate me, is it only one that needs to meet, they only need to meet one criteria, so two is sort of like great, but you only need one, is that right?
Thank you, through you, Chair. That's correct. Only one HERCON criteria needs to be met for the home to be considered eligible to be included in the heritage overlay.
Thank you.
Councillor Friend Pereira.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. The first one is on thank you, 46 Fortuna Avenue. I understand it's got some proposed internal controls. Can council officers just elaborate as to how we enforce those internal controls? If they're inside the house, it might be hard for us to spot changes. And the second question is just on the ministerial authorisations. How long are we likely to wait for authorisations of our valued heritage properties? And do we have a backlog with the minister waiting?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'll go for the second one first. While you won't like the answer, it's a fairly simple one, is that we don't know. We have a significant backlog at the moment sitting with the Minister for Planning on heritage amendments that are awaiting authorisation. Some have been with the Minister, if I'm not mistaken, either approaching the 2-year mark or having even exceeded the 2-year mark already. So Rosebery Street, I think, is the one in question that's been sitting with the Minister for a very long time. And there is nominally a 10-day benchmark, but that's very rarely met and achieved by the department. So that's that. With regards to the internal controls, yes, you are correct that it's harder to monitor that and not so much enforce that, monitor that when it comes to internal controls, because we don't really have any visibility of that. With external changes, it's much easier to see that and to spot, but the enforcement action is the same if it is spotted that illegal works are undertaken or being carried out, as it is with external work, so that doesn't change that. The planning permit trigger exists, and there's a breach of the planning scheme or something that's done. That's not in accordance with the planning scheme.
Any further questions? There don't appear to be any further questions, so I'm now going to be in search of a motion. Councillor Rabuki.
Through you, Chair, I would like to move that we accept the officer's recommendation and the 6 points as they are presented on the screen up there, with reference to 46 Fortuna Avenue, Balwyn North, and 4 Windsor Crescent, Surrey Hills.
Thank you, Councillor Rabuki. Do we have a seconder for that motion?
Yes, through you, Chair, I'll second that motion.
Councillor Nolan, I think, was first on the list. I think he hit his button quicker. So if you're happy, we'll record him as the seconder for this matter.
Perfectly happy.
Through you, Chair, I'd like to second the motion and reserve my right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone opposed to the motion as it stands on the screen? There is not. So it falls to you, Councillor Ibuki, to address it if you wish.
Yes, I'd also like to thank the council officers for preparing the comprehensive notes with regards to the two properties. I'd also like to thank Susan, Yvonne and Christine for presenting tonight and supporting this movement. In respect of 4 Windsor Crescent, that property has significant historical context as a purpose-designed residence and surgery. But not only that, it is a fine example of a Federation property, of which we have lost many in Boroondara. And I would hope that at some stage and sooner than later, this property might be soon restored to its previous glory. I note that it is looking a little bit unloved. So if the owner of the property is listening or reading the notes, I do urge you to look at the value of that property and do some restorative work. Thank you very much.
This motion is unopposed tonight. I'm going to move straight forward unless Councillor Nolan feels deeply aggrieved. You don't need to speak. Oh, you do wish to speak briefly?
Just very briefly.
Very briefly.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to also thank Susan and Yvonne and Christina for attending and coming along and presenting tonight. This is on the 46 Fortuna Avenue, Robin Boyd. I think it was for his brother and sister-in-law. He did the design. There've been 2 extensions, and we've heard that he's preeminent in post-war architecture. So this is just really very awesome that we're able to have this nomination, and for both properties to meet historical and aesthetic significance is excellent. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, councillors. I will now put this motion. Those in favour? I would say that's unanimous. Thank you very much. It's carried. Okay, we now move to item 3.2 in the agenda, 552A Burke Road, Camberwell, a proposal for an 8 or 4-storey mixed-use development. This is in fact a state government development facilitation program, and a very unusual thing for us to come before us, one of the first. So tonight I'd start by first handing over to Scott Walker to run you through the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I thought it was important to put this proposal in context, given the comments just made now by the Chair, that this is an unusual situation that we have before us, and one that we haven't confronted too often so far at Boroondara Council. The state government introduced a development facilitation program a number of years ago now, but made some adjustments to that as part of the housing statement announcements in September 2023. And as part of that remodelled development facilitation program, there's an ability for applicants to put forward applications to the development facilitation program, which is operated and run by the Department of Transport and Planning on behalf of the Minister for Planning, where the application is for $50 million or more, it involves housing, and that there's at least a 10% contribution to affordable housing. Now, you'll hear in a moment the detail and the report actually outlines that there's actually other or multiple ways of meeting that 10% affordable housing, and you'll hear a little bit about that or see that in the report. The proposal is at a pre-application stage, so there is a planning consultant that has approached council officers, but then also formally approached the Department of Transport and Planning under the Development Facilitation Program, and a formal referral has been put to council to provide pre-application comment before a formal planning application is lodged via that program. So it's an interesting approach and process, but we are actually dealing with and responding to a formal referral, giving pre-application advice and comments only. We are not giving comments on an application. Once an application is lodged with the Development Facilitation Program, we will have 2 weeks in which to provide comment on the formal application. Now, at that point, the decision process will then be in the hands of the Development Facilitation Program. So we are a referral that can provide comments. We are not in control or do not make a decision on the application. So that just sort of sets in context what's going on here and how we're able to actually input into this process and matter before us. So I'll hand over to Stephanie Ng, one of our coordinators in the development planning team. No, I'll hand over to Joel Elborn, our Manager of Urban Planning, who will take us through this proposal.
My hand up was just a flag to our governance officer to present the slide, so I'll hand over to Steph.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I present UPDC item number 3.2 relating to a pre-application referred to Council by the Department of Transport and Planning for the proposed development of the land at 552A Burke Road in Camberwell. The proposal includes demolition of the former vicarage at 552A, Camberwell, the removal of 9 canopy trees, construction of 2 mixed-use buildings above a shared double basement. Building 1 will contain 4 stories with 15.4 meters in height, with 16 2-bedroom apartments and a place of assembly. Building 2 will be 8 stories, 29.3 meters in height, with 23 bedroom apartments and a food and drink premises. A public accessible east-west pedestrian link from Burke Road to Lower Reserve, and a cash contribution equal to 3% of the development cost to the Social Housing Growth Fund in lieu of the 10% affordable housing. Council's officers have undertaken an assessment of the proposal so that the preliminary comments can be provided to the Department of Transport and Planning, noting that the proposed heights cannot be supported under the current zoning for the site. The proposed design approach, which includes 2 apartment forms as part of the mixed-use development scaled to Campbell Road and Lower Reserve, has strategic merit in the context of the site's location in a major activity centre earmarked for additional housing. There are a range of issues that need to be addressed with design improvements or further information in relation to overshadowing, public realm integration, vegetation impacts, planting opportunities, urban design, car parking provision, heritage impacts, and solar opportunities. There are concerns with the proposed approach to affordable housing requirement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ng. Tonight, we have 2 with us in the gallery who wish to present, 1 and against and 1 in support of the proposal. We'll start with Christina Brannigan. If you could join us at the table. Thank you very much.
Good evening again. My name's Christina and I live in Camberwell. I'm speaking again on behalf of the Burundara Heritage Group. We support significant increase in housing in Camberwell and Council's junction plan. But I and other residents who've only just found out about this proposal are very concerned at the approach that the government is taking with the planning application. It involves the demolition of protected heritage without due consideration, we think, of the significance of the heritage precinct and without involvement by the community. So it's a process in particular that we are objecting to. I don't understand why the demolition of a heritage place is not seen as a more significant concern. And actually, we don't see any clear explanation in the officer report as to the criteria the heritage advisor has used to decide that they don't think the house, the vicarage that's going to be demolished, contributes to the civic and community heritage precinct. A previous heritage process and gazetting of this place as a contributory property had a different conclusion. So why has council seemed to accept this new opinion so quickly, given that you were only given the papers on, I believe, on the 30th of December? So we believe the community has a right to some more explanation and evidence. The house has been there for 100 years. And in fact, it's about the statement of significance for the civic and community heritage precinct, which I've asked people from governance to share with you councillors. It does identify the presbytery as a heritage place and that it does contribute to heritage significance. The government's currently stating in public documents and communications that the heritage overlay will remain at activity centres and in the densification zone it's calling the walkable catchment zone. But this example is a very concerning example, even though it's using a slightly different program, that probably shows us that in the real world, outside of the public rhetoric and behind the closed doors conversations with the development sector, with community excluded, that what we're going to see is deals being done to demolish heritage places, and that's our concern here tonight. How can we, the people of Melbourne who hold our heritage dear, feel any confidence in what we are being promised in such an unclear and non-transparent way? And how can we feel confident we're not going to lose many very significant heritage protected places around activity centres? And why are we not allowed to participate? The statement of significance on the Victorian Heritage Database for the Camberwell Civic and Community Precinct states a number of things. I'll just mention a few of them. It talks about this triangle of land as having great historical significance to the city. It talks about it having major historical importance. It talks about it having at least 12 very important buildings within that precinct designed by a number of very significant architects who councillors will have heard of, called Beswick, James Gould, Crouch and Wilson, Fritsch and Williams. This part of Burke Road also has a number of mansions and individually protected houses up towards Toorak Road. I'd like us to think tonight, please, councillors, about whether this precedent will mean that developers will be given a green light to purchase these heritage houses and demolish them.
Ms Brannigan, can you move towards wrapping up?
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Or indeed to demolish, partially demolish and add degrading 10-storey high-rises attached to these heritage places. So we ask for further information from council to explain why it's taken the position that it has, and we would like to see it object more strongly to the lack of due heritage process here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, are there any questions of this presenter? There are none. Thank you very much. No, sorry. I'd like later appearances. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Brannigan, for your presentation. I was actually reading some documents from the officer report and this was passed around. Did you circulate this?
The statement of significance?
Yeah. Is this a document that you've brought to
Yes, I
hand
brought
to
that along
council?
tonight and asked governance to share it with you, yes.
Yeah, look, thank you very much. Clearly you've gone to a lot of detail and done a lot of research. I just wanted to ask you, because of the degree of what you've put in this presentation and we haven't had the opportunity to read through it all, did you touch on each key aspect in your presentation, or was there one particular element that you were not able to cover in that 3-minute time frame?
Well, what you've got in front of you there, councillor, is the government's statement of significance. It's on the Victorian Heritage Database. So it's a public document that shows that this heritage precinct is important and states why it's important and lists all the important heritage buildings in it and why they're protected. So I'm not quite sure I understand your question, sorry.
That's fine. We just obviously didn't have an opportunity to read it all, but I want to thank you for providing
So
it.
I guess I provided that,
Yeah.
hoping that councillors could have a read at that separately and to understand how important this heritage precinct is around here, and that really we shouldn't be just demolishing a building because maybe it's not the most important one in the precinct without proper and due consideration.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm trying to get across the information. I'd like to ask you a question, Christina. You've said you'd like advice from the officers or to hear why this information hasn't been taken into account significantly, but perhaps would it be fair to say that you'd also like to see it taken into account in any submission that council may make to the state government?
Yes, we'd like to see council expressing concern about the demolition of a heritage place, and that this process might become a norm, that the council and community would not be involved in that kind of decision making. We're also concerned, reading the report, that it talks about a heritage advisor being asked, a current heritage advisor being asked about the proposal, and there's just a couple of sentences in there that just say the current heritage advisor believes that the place does not contribute to the heritage significance of the heritage precinct. Yet the document, the government document you have before you, and what the planning minister has signed off in the past, and the work that council and the community have done and paid for in the past, has proven that that house does play a role. I'm not saying it's the most important place in the precinct, but I'm concerned, or we're concerned, that why is one heritage advisor, who's perhaps only had a very short while to consider it, just said, okay, well, we don't think that house is very important. We'd like to see their report and what criteria they use to come to that decision.
Thank you. And the officer's report, maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, seems to suggest that the proposed development might even contribute to heritage significance. Have you read through that, or is that your interpretation?
That wasn't my take. I thought there was a suggestion that perhaps one might be able to make up for the loss of the heritage place by having some plaques or signage, which is not something that we support. You can't replace.
And do you think there's any merit in council undertaking further heritage research of the area as a matter of urgency in relation to these issues? I don't know what information there is currently available. What you've presented here is very helpful.
Well, I think to me it would seem sensible to try and take the time to do a more detailed heritage assessment. Well, I don't know if assessment's the right word. We've already got an assessment of the precinct. There have been a couple of changes in the buildings, I think, since the statement of significance was written. We've no longer got the hall that we used to have. I think that a heritage consultant should do a proper job determining whether we're going to lose any heritage significance, if that house goes, and what the alternatives might be. I don't know. Perhaps it should be moved and rebuilt, put somewhere else. That's sometimes what happens, but we're not really seeing much evidence of a lot of thinking. And I note that we're going to have the consultation, of course, for this area anyway, as a part of the Reserve Road temporary closure. So perhaps that presents a good opportunity to really consider what we need to do in terms of recognising the importance of this heritage precinct. As I say, there are a number of important architects who've built churches and buildings here.
Thank you.
Councillor Osborne-Smith.
Thank you, Christina, for that presentation and for illuminating us a little more to some of the heritage aspects of this proposal. I just wanted to ask you if you could assist educating us councillors for a moment on how a vicarage or how the home of a minister typically sits with a church. It's quite common we're finding, of course, in these sorts of precincts, there's a home for church hierarchy. Can you explain, at least anecdotally, in your experience and the like, how these buildings work together, how important it is for the church and the vicarage to cohabitate, if you like?
No, I'm not an expert on that, so I don't claim to be able to answer that at all as a heritage expert. All I can do is refer you to the statement of significance for the heritage, for the civic precinct here, which does talk about the manse, for example.
Councillor, I think we might be straying a little bit from
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I can answer that, but there are a lot of examples of protected churches and the presbytery or the manse next door. We've actually got one in the precinct here, designed by Beswick. Yeah.
Thank you.
There doesn't appear to be any further questions. Thank you again for your presentation. I now call upon Liz Burton to join us at the horseshoe table. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors and officers. Liz Burton, Camberwell. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this item. And I should just clarify that I am opposed to many aspects of the development, but I was in agreement with the officers' report and recommendations. My submission relates primarily to the response by the architects to the site, primarily west-facing, in the context of climate change and accelerating temperatures. We're currently looking at an increase post the Industrial Revolution of over 1.5 degrees, with quite catastrophic effects here in Australia, most recently, currently in Queensland, where they've had over 1 metre of rain in a day. This is just a classic response of a very standard nature, rather than thinking more creatively and in response to climate change. Because ultimately, with glazed frontage facing west, the heat on a day like today of 39 degrees is going to penetrate those rooms and require air conditioning, which is primarily based on fossil fuel. So it's going to contribute to the heat. There's also very little setback at the front. The trees will be removed. So everything about it is contrary to the principles of responding to climate change, and we can demand something much better. At present, we have a classic industrial response. It's an intense development with very little concession to what is needed when responding primarily to amenity, particularly with higher temperatures. So I'm recommending that the 9 trees be retained, particularly the trees at the front, that they be required to introduce double glazing as a minimum, because we don't have that. They achieve the minimum 7-star rating under NABERS. When you compare that with Nightingale developments in Brunswick, for example, they achieve a minimum 7.8 per apartment and an average of 8.6 star for that development. So I'm recommending a much deeper setback to accommodate the trees at the front, and I'm recommending that the vicarage could be used as an art gallery, which they refer to. They're going to have an art gallery as a public space, and that vicarage could comprise that particular initiative. And if it needs relocating, then it should be, but at least it will provide a really beautiful space as an art gallery. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions of this presenter? None? Thank you very much again for your presentation. As there are no further presenters tonight, I'll return to the officers for matters arising if you wish to address those.
Thanks, Chair. I might just kick off firstly, before I hand over to Ms. NG to talk about the referral from a heritage point of view, but I just want to tackle this question, this issue of process. There are process issues here. There are process concerns, and they have been expressed by this council in regard to some of the planning reforms and the new processes that have been set up. This is a new process under those planning reforms where an applicant can choose to bypass council, in effect, and go straight to the development facilitation program. They can apply for a proposal that is beyond what guidance is within the planning scheme, as long as it meets the criteria around cost of development and affordable housing. And council is in a position where it needs to input into someone else's process. We don't have control of that process, we don't have control of the timing, and we can't make formal decisions in regard to the application. The fact that we have brought this before you this evening in a public process is one that was raised concern with the development facilitation program. They were surprised and concerned that we were providing pre-application advice via an in-principle position before you in a public forum. We felt that's important, that you get the opportunity to review and consider the officer's preliminary assessment and advice that we're providing as part of that process. So that's something that was raised with us. We're saying, as part of our process in dealing with this type of matter, and this is the first one of this type in this form, it's important that we are transparent, that we provide opportunities for speakers from the public, and we encourage and support that. In terms of heritage, there were some comments about the heritage considerations and that this is raising similar considerations to the walkable catchment areas that are proposed for activity centres and their relationship with heritage overlays. And there is a relationship there and a context there that needs to be considered. Heritage overlays in activity centres and in places where development is encouraged do need to be considered in that context. And that's what officers will do and have done as part of their assessment or preliminary assessment here. Heritage advisors, and the heritage advisors provide context and explanation as to their views on the heritage components that are important and should be considered in making a decision whether a demolition of that component is supported. And that's what's occurred as part of the input process to our preliminary advice. Just because a heritage component is recognised in the statement of significance doesn't mean that there can't be an application considered to change that and consider that. And in fact, that's a pretty strong principle in terms of putting forward heritage overlays, that it is at the application stage that you get to look at those components in a little bit more detail. And that's what's preliminary advice and assessment process. So I'll just hand over now for any further comments in that regard to Joel Elborn, the Manager of Urban Planning.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I'll just make some further comments in relation to the heritage, and of course we're happy to share the detail that we do have on request in relation to that heritage position that was reached, but that there is also an opportunity to revisit that position in greater depth should this application proceed to progressing through the development facilitation program, where we will have an opportunity to provide further and more formal commentary and advice on the application at that stage. In relation to some of the environmentally sustainable development comments that were made in relation to the orientation of the building, again, there is an opportunity for a further and deeper review of ESD and the development's compliance with the relevant policies there. But it is interesting that the assessment criteria that we do have is largely geared around avoiding south-facing dwellings and the energy impacts in relation to having more south-facing dwellings than what might be desirable as a balance, rather than avoiding, say, west-facing and the impacts there. We note there needs to be better landscaping opportunities in lieu of the vegetation that's proposed to be removed. There's an opportunity for more solar panels as well, which would assist with the concerns in relation to the west-facing elements of the proposal. Possibly opportunities for passive screening of the west, and we can look at that further detail down the track.
Thank you. It is now time for questions from councillors. Councillor Osborne-Smith.
I have a number of questions, but before I ask them, Chair, I'd like to foreshadow a motion. It feels to me that there's a number of issues about this proposal that have come up at short notice. Heritage, ESD are two, of course, that have been spoken about tonight. Can you give us some comfort as to how the process works in relation to the pre-application process and then the formal application process? I guess what I'm asking is, will we have the opportunity to thoroughly investigate some of these issues next time around when the application comes before us?
Thanks, Chair. I might answer that. We actually don't know. This is a new process. This is the first time we've had a planning application. Well, it's not the first time that we've provided preliminary advice prior to a development facilitation application of this type, but as a planning application model, this is the first time, if this proceeds to an application, that we would have gone through the formal pre-application and then comments on a formal application. When we receive the formal application, if this proceeds, we will have a very small window of 2 weeks to provide that formal commentary back. So that gives only a very short period of time in which to go deeper on any particular aspects or concerns of the proposal in the final form that the proposal comes forward in. And we do not know whether the issues that we're raising now will have been progressed or addressed to the extent that we're anticipating at that point. We don't know what we'll actually get at that formal application stage.
If I could ask a follow-up question, Chair. So if we look at the officer's recommendation tonight, is there anything in that may prejudice our ability to open a new issue or delve deeper into an issue at the application stage? Perhaps you don't.
Through your Chair, no, there's not. We can raise additional issues when it's submitted as a formal application. We can raise any issue on our assessment at that point in time. Having said that, we feel it is likely that the Department of Transport and Planning will put a lot of weight on the pre-application advice because of the formality of the way that's been referred to Council. Now, where we've had these sorts of applications or matters previously, the pre-application stage has not been formal in this way. This is something that's emerged as the development facilitation program has established its practice and processes for these types of applications. So that presumably that's through experience at other councils. And as the department has received more applications, they've refined the process that they use.
That completes your questions, Councillor Osborne-Smith.
I have one further question, if I may. It's perhaps of a more general nature. The cap at $50 million being the project cost over which the development facilitation model is allowed to be progressed through the State Government Committee. Do you know if there's any what sort of validation process is brought about to check whether a project is 50 million or 49 or 48? And perhaps as a corollary to that question, the contribution to be made to state government in lieu of affordable housing criteria of 10% being the 3% figure. Just a question to you is whether you know whether that amount is indexed over time. Just trying to get some understanding, if you have it, as to the strength of how this process works.
Through yourself, Chair, through the material that I've reviewed, there's no indication or understanding or clarity around the indexation. I'm not sure. Again, we haven't had a lot of experience with these sorts of applications. In fact, this is the first one under this criteria. If I can just make a general comment as well about the Development Facilitation Program, there are other criteria that applications can be submitted under. So, for example, if it's a type of development that is considered of appropriate economic stimulus to the state of Victoria, that can be submitted under this program. If it's got the support of Invest Victoria, there are other ways that applications can get into the Development Facilitation Program. It's just this application is using a specific clause within the planning scheme regarding affordable housing and a development size. So there are other ways of getting into that Development Facilitation Program. In terms of as I say, in terms of the indexation, we're not sure, and in terms of the verification process for the cost of development, that's not clear to us, except when it comes to establishing the affordable housing component. That 3% contribution on construction cost is following the submission of a feasibility report or a quantity surveyor's report to establish the cost of the development.
Councillor Osborne-Smith, does that exhaust your questions for now?
Perhaps one final question. Could you give us councillors a bit of a feel for how many projects may satisfy a $50 million criteria? What sort of size building might that be? I'm just trying to get a feel for how many of these applications might be coming our way in the coming months and years ahead.
Thanks, Chair. It's a really good question. Most of the larger scale mixed-use developments in the activity centres will meet that criteria. So it's certainly not hundreds that would meet that criteria, but certainly most in the activity centres it'll be would meet that sort of criteria and that sort of cost of development. It's not a, you wouldn't say it's a particularly high bar in today's context of cost of development within activity centres.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Question, perhaps for Mr Walker, I'm not sure. With regard to the Social Housing Growth Fund and the indicated 3% that would go into that fund, does Burundara Council have any oversight or any involvement of where that monies could be better utilised within Burundara?
Again, through yourself, Chair, we have no role in where that money is spent. If it is money that's been generated through developments within Burundara, we've got no direct control over that. We can obviously advocate to the state government and to Homes Victoria in regard to projects that we think would be worthy of contributions from that fund, but we have no direct control and there's no direct link to funds contributed as part of these sorts of projects to specific projects within Burundara.
Thank you. And through local government, peak body, for example, the Municipal Association of Victoria, do they or any council authority have the ability to monitor what the value of the fund is at? Do we know what has been collected and where it's sitting? Is there any transparency of the actual fund?
Through yourself, Chair, that's something I'd need to take on notice. I'm not sure about whether that is something that's regularly published and provided. I'm sure there's ways of getting an indication of that.
Thank you. And sorry, just one final question. Are you aware, and I know this may be perhaps something to take on notice, but are you aware of any monies from the Social Housing Growth Fund to ever be contributed to a project in the City of Boroondara?
Again, through yourself, Chair, I would need to again take that on notice. That fund may well be quite broad and quite wide. I'm not sure how that fund has contributed to some of the affordable housing projects such as Bill Street and Markham Estate, for example. But I'm not sure what component or whether any component from this fund has contributed to those projects. So again, that's something that I would need clarification on.
Right. Thank you. And in closing, if I might just finish with mentioning that my understanding would be any significant projects built in Boroondara where there is significant impact on Boroondara's infrastructure and amenity and parks and gardens and potentially parking and transport impost. My understanding would be that would be utilised in Boroondara to compensate, but perhaps I'm misunderstanding the process. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Comment? We'll take that as a comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Friend Pereira.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Hollingworth beat me to it on affordable and social housing, so I'm going to pivot slightly. With regards to the activity centres, I believe the government have said that there's a two-year period before they'll introduce the infrastructure levy. Do you think, would an infrastructure levy apply to a development like this coming through this, what is it called again, the Development Facilitation Programme, or would that also be exempted?
Thanks, Chair, through yourself. To date, we've had very, very little information around the detail of that infrastructure levy and how that will work. What we know is it's been announced. What we know is it will start as a pilot for the 10 pilot activity centres where we're waiting for final planning controls in the coming weeks, presumably, for those 10 pilot activity centres across Melbourne, with an announcement that there will be work done with an industry working group to finalise those draft infrastructure controls. We don't know the extent of those controls, what sorts of projects they'll contribute towards, how they will actually work, who will collect them, at what point they'll be collected in the process. So we have very, very little information at this stage, and that remains to be revealed. What we do make an assumption around, and that certainly has not been corrected, and I've raised this with a number of state government representatives, that it will not be retrospective. So if, for example, this permit is issued by the Development Facilitation Program this year, it will not be subject to that levy in the future. And that goes for any other project that's approved within the Camberwell Activity Centre. And we suspect that there may be many in the coming 2 years.
Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to officers, I've got two questions. The first is, I'm wondering why officers have not included reference to Heritage Overlay 506 in the motion, the officers' recommendation there, and if they would be able to provide comment as to whether they think it's appropriate to reference the contributory status.
Through you, Chair, it's true that we have not explicitly listed the heritage particulars and schedule in the recommendation that could be included. the report certainly does note concerns with impact on the church in terms of advantage. So that is an issue raised in the report that will be passed on to the DFP.
Thanks. And a second question, if I may. When an application is made like this, direct to the state government under this new process, and therefore council is not the responsible authority, will the developer still be required to make a contribution to the Burundara Open Space Development Fund?
Through yourself, Chair, again, we don't know. We anticipate that if a planning permit is issued only for development, then a subdivision permit, once the development is complete, will need to be obtained from Burundara Council, which means that the open space contribution will be payable to the council. Now, that depends on whether the application is ultimately, for subdivision, is ultimately submitted to the council. It's only then that we'll have control on exact what conditions are applied to the development. If the subdivision application is lodged as part of the development application and is approved by the Development Facilitation Program, we will recommend and put forward conditions requiring the open space contribution, but we cannot be guaranteed that that condition will be applied. So the simple answer is we don't know, but we think that we will still get that open space contribution. Having said that, the only time that we actually get the open space contribution is when a development is subdivided. If this is a project that, for example, is delivered as a build-to-rent project, it won't be subdivided and we will never get the open space contribution. That's one of the limitations of the open space contribution as we start to look towards different housing models that might be supported under these sorts of programs.
Thank you.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask some questions to clarify some points. The vicarage, to be absolutely clear, is that has a contributory grading in the overlay?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct. It's covered by the heritage overlay and is indicated as such.
And I mean, this is repeating the question in a sense that Councillor Simfield said, but there is no mention in the report, is there, of the HO 506 Civic and Community Precinct overlay? That's correct. Or just in the motion? It's in the report, but not in the motion.
Yeah, it certainly is listed in the head table and was absolutely the basis of consideration of assessment, referral to our heritage advisors and key comments that have come out in the referral table at the base of the report.
Through yourself, Chair, can I maybe just add as well that absolutely that will be drawn and has been drawn to the attention of the Development Facilitation Program, and that will be a relevant assessment and consideration for them as part of deciding on this application.
Can I ask a question of the Director, just to clarify? So that's been done verbally because it's not in the officer's recommendation, or that's something that they'll invariably take into account? Just to clarify that comment.
That's correct. So we'll be drawing their attention to the detail of the report and assessment that we've included that supports this ultimate officer recommendation, and will also be outlining the relevant planning controls that affect the site.
And to understand our heritage advisors' comments, is what the heritage advisor is saying, and I can't find the page now with the reference, something that the vicarage should be allowed to be demolished in order to unlock the development potential of the site because the site is so large and the vicarage is small? Is that the argument?
The summary comment there from the heritage advice is that it does not make an active contribution.
Even though it's graded contributory. I'm trying to find the passage now, but my understanding was that it is contributory, and unfortunately I can't find, it's on page 83.
Through yourself, Chair, if I maybe just also add to that response, it's not the role of the Heritage Advisor to weigh up the other planning considerations that might outweigh some of the heritage commentary and heritage concerns. What we have asked the Heritage Advisor to make comment on is to what extent the vicarage contributes to the significance of that site and that overall overlay. They haven't been asked to make comment or to weigh up other planning considerations. That's a job for the planner that's then assessing the application.
And the third paragraph is the Heritage Advisor's view. You've paragraph before then is perhaps not the reflections of the Heritage Advisor, but the planning officers, which say, and I'll quote from the paragraph, the loss of a contributory graded building is contrary to Council's heritage policy. However, a balanced approach should be employed that considers the available site area, etc., and the strategic development potential within the major activity centre. So that's perhaps then the planning officers' views rather than the heritage officers'
That's
advice.
correct.
Okay. And that's then reflected in the officer's recommendation 1B, that says suggests there's strategic merit in redeveloping. If this council is of a view that it does want to protect the vicarage and is of a view that the heritage value there is significant and that the potential impact of the development will detrimentally impact on the civic and community precinct and the heritage value of the civic and community precinct in its totality, what steps might officers suggest that could be taken to ensure that happens in the most effective and efficient way?
Again, through yourself, Chair, it would be open to the council to include reference to the significance of the heritage contribution and that should be taken into consideration as part of the commentary provided in the response back to and the resolution this evening. So that could be an additional dot point, bringing or drawing to the attention of the DTP the specific heritage considerations for that particular site.
And how long do we have before we need to make a submission? How many days, or do we have another week to get additional advice?
Through yourself, Chair, no, we don't. We've already asked for additional time to enable us to bring this matter to you this evening. So the pre-application feedback is due tomorrow, and that's an extended period to enable us to bring this before you this evening. We do not know, however, the subsequent time frame in which an application may or may not be formally lodged with the Department of Transport and Planning, and when we will get a formal referral.
Thank you. And look, I'll just flag more of a question to the Chair, whether the Chair would entertain an adjournment motion to allow us some time to get advice in relation to amending a motion to incorporate heritage protection.
It depends whether we need an adjournment to do that. We've had a proposed foreshadowing of a motion tonight. And if that exhausts questions, unless Councillor Osborne-Smith, you've got further questions at this time, I'd say, do you have a motion and are you happy with your motion?
Let's move it,
Thank you, Chair. I had foreshadowed a motion which aimed to improve or bolster or strengthen the officer's recommendation that we're looking at on screen tonight. It did include a reference to heritage as being an issue. However, in light of what we've heard tonight and the questions that have come around the table from Councillor Sinfield and Councillor Franco and others, I feel that clause could be improved. So I think it would assist the process if we could have a short adjournment in order that we may just rework that paragraph to improve the motion that I'm foreshadowing.
So are you moving a motion that we adjourn the meeting?
I would like to move a motion to adjourn, yes.
Do we have a seconder for that? Who got in first? Councillor Sinfield, thank you very much. We are adjourned. Or to resume the meeting. Councillor Sinfield, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Hollingsworth? All of those in support. Thank you. The meeting is now resumed. Can we return to you, Councillor Osborne-Smith? Are you in a position to put a motion tonight? It's on the screen.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. Could I see the motion on the screen?
Because a lot of things have changed, would you like to run us through the motion as it currently stands or what you have changed?
Yes, thank you, Chair. You'll see on screen there are words in black, which were the original officer's recommendations, and then there are words in red, which are the amendments that I have proposed those officers' recommendation. We've wrapped it all up into the one new recommendation, which I'm putting forward as a motion. I'll speak just briefly to it.
Oh no, let's just see if we get a seconder first.
Oh, that might be a good idea.
We might do that. So, well, I was only asking you to explain it so we could get a seconder to it, basically. Okay. But do we have a seconder who's prepared to second it in the condition it's currently in?
Excuse me, Chair, we haven't actually seen the whole motion yet. Thank you.
Oh.
I'm happy to second the motion.
All right.
Sorry, can I just get, is there any more to the motion?
Can you scroll up and let everyone see where we're at?
Point 10?
No. Oh, there we go. Councillor Franco, you may want to consider your position.
Okay, let me read.
Thank you.
I'm happy to second the motion.
Okay. So that becomes the motion. Is anyone opposed to this motion as it's currently on the screen? Have you had long enough to consider it? There seems to be debate.
Can I make a small suggestion, Chair? If the mover was willing just to swap the order of B and C in clause 1, just because B is pending and C is in fact in concrete.
Does it matter?
I take your point, but I'm happy to leave it the way it is because in my mind the order of priority, if you like, is best represented the way it is. But thanks for the suggestion.
All right. So I return to the question again. Is anyone opposed to the motion as it appears on the screen? No? Councillor Osborne-Smith, would you like to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, thank you, Chair. The paragraphs that we've added in red, or that I've added in red, reflect a, I would suggest, improved or bolstered response that we are, as a council, requesting be made with regard to this application. The first paragraph refers to the fact that we are now in the process of preparing a civic park master plan, which is in its preliminary phase only, but as the weeks and months unfold, more information on that will come to light. So that first paragraph is referring to that important process that this council and its officers are undertaking. The changes in B and C reflect the fact that the proposal does not align with the Camberwell Junction Structure and Place Plan, which I might add is pending authorisation from the Minister for Planning, but nonetheless, that very comprehensive document, which was prepared over many years of work and community consultation and endorsed by Council in March last year, does not anticipate a high rise of the nature of this building on that site. And therefore, I feel that it's important to recognise that this project is inconsistent with that structure and place plan. And then part C that you're looking at reflects on some of the learnings tonight, that this site is part of a Heritage Overlay HO 506, which recognises contributory grading of the vicarage building and surrounds. If I could ask that the document be scrolled down, point 10 reiterates that point about heritage, and if I could move down the next page to point 4 in particular, which is the concern that some councillors have raised with me about this application, and that being that it's important, we feel, to refer to the Ministers for Planning and Homes Victoria advocating for a more transparent and equitable approach to the provision of public and affordable housing in the Boroondara area. So we feel that's an important point to add to. And finally, point 5 is simply to document that the next steps in this process are to explore our council's future plans with with the landowner in question in relation to this site. So I thank my fellow councillors for their contribution and input to what I think has substantially improved this officer's recommendation, and I would recommend this motion to my fellow councillors. Thank you.
As this motion is not opposed, I probably wouldn't go to the seconder unless you're busting to say something, Councillor Franco. I will now move to put the motion. All of those in favour? All of those against? Councillor abstaining? Anyone abstaining? Thank you. All right, the motion is carried. Thank you. What was the date of it? It has been brought to my attention that my run sheet didn't cover the minutes from the last meeting. So that was on the 2nd of December and the 16th of December, both of them. You have these minutes. I'd like to have someone move that we adopt these minutes. Councillor Hollingsworth.
I would certainly like to move the motion to adopt the minutes as circulated in our portal. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Osborne-Smith.
Yes, happy to second that. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's carried. I'll vote. All of those in support. Unanimous. Thank you. I'll now move to item 4, general business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business tonight? 5, urgent business. Are there any items of urgent business tonight? Confidential business. I'm advised that there isn't any confidential business. Before I close this meeting, I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening and declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting closed. Thank you very much.